All right, thank you for this opening remarks. And now we're jumping in just into the first panel of the summit, which is Life Sciences and Health. So I invite the conference speakers to join me here on the stage. So here we are for the first panel, right from the start with a very interesting topic, I think, very relevant these days, life sciences and health, where we're in the middle of a pandemic. There's going to be questions around that. Obviously, we cannot go around that. But obviously, we're going to address some questions with an impact on the economies, science. Science, there's always a link with sciences and economies and our society. So let's from the start, I will let you introduce yourself, Frederic and Felix, for about 1 to 2 minutes. Maybe we can start with Felix.
So the questions at the beginning of a short speech are the same as on camera, right? Can you hear me? Can you see my screen? So it's a pleasure for me to be here. My name is Felix Uedelhoven. I work for GE Healthcare. I lead our government affairs work in Europe. And over the past 2 years of the pandemic, it's really been a very humbling and interesting experience to work for a company that produces medical technologies that most of us have been in touch with when we visit a hospital, ultrasound, X-ray, CT, but also a company that produces equipment that was life-saving during these past 2 years. Especially during the time when vaccines were not available yet. So, for example, we are producing ventilators that are used to intubate patients, and patient monitors to record the vitals of critically ill patients. So, over the past 2 years, it's really I've less been I think a typical lobbyist, but more a procurement and supply chain manager, because just the landscape and the demands have changed so drastically over these past months. I think I'll leave it. Maybe one element that I was reminded of in the introductory speech. I used to work in the European Parliament. It feels ages ago, and at the time we were part of the CETA negotiation team. So it's probably 10 years ago. It feels, but it was a great experience, and I'm glad to be here amongst Canadian friends again.
Thank you, Felix. Just a reminder, as CETA started way back, almost 15 to 17 years ago. I think it was back in 2006 where the first idea of a CETA agreement came into force, and it's been 4 years now, 21st of September 2017, that is in force. So now, what about you, Frederic?
So, okay, can you hear me? You can hear me, yes. So I'm Fred Sallmann. I'm a big fan of Canada. In fact, I did some of my studies in Canada, in Quebec. Can you hear me? Yes, yes. So I did my PhD in Quebec, so I'm a scientist. And I was coming from France, so I was born in France, and now I'm living in Belgium. So I'm a big Canada European guy, I guess. So I'm here first on my behalf. So I'm not, even though I'm working for a big pharma company, I'm not representing the pharma here. I'm representing myself with my own interest. But so my job in this big pharma is disruptive innovation, so I'm really looking forward to invent together with my team and with the world, in fact, with Canada as well, the healthcare of tomorrow. And so we would like to be in a disease-less world, in fact. So we really would like to have us enjoying the life without being sick. So this is our program.
Thank you. I would strongly recommend that you put your mic very close to your mouth in order to hear you. We would really like to have your point of views on these topics and to hear you well. So please, if you can do so, that would be much appreciated. Thank you. I'm not, obviously, I'm not a professional in life sciences and health, so I'm going to read the questions, and most of the information is going to get, you're going to get from these specialists, Frederic and Felix. So the first question is, we have been told that we have to learn to live with the COVID-19. At the same time, the sanitary strategies in Canada and the European Union seems to want to eradicate the virus. So far, what should be learned from this pandemic to help us react more effectively to future pandemics? So who's interested in answering that question first?
Okay, I go for it.
To the researcher first.
Sorry?
First to the researcher, and then I can complement maybe.
So in fact, before eradicating COVID-19, we will have indeed to learn how to live with this. So we have to remember that I believe as of today there is only one pathogen that has been eradicated. This is smallpox. It was in the 80s. And we are still living with any other deadly pathogens, in fact. And so, what we have learned with this is, so first of all, I believe I was amazed, in fact, with the reaction of the vast majority of the population that was really committed to take care of each other, and more than 80%, I believe, of the population get vaccinated, for instance, which is very, very responsible from the population. I also believe, and this is my big belief, so I believe there is a big pharma and there is a lot of ecosystem with biotechs. And here we have had the demonstration that the biotechs are very great. So I'm thinking about Moderna, BioNTech, CureVac, also universities that were able to develop some products, some solutions to the crisis with the mRNA vaccines. We learn a lot about it, but also with proteins vaccines. And they get the help of big pharma like Pfizer, for instance, to reach out to the world and to the supply of their solutions. And so I believe this is something that was very impressive for me, and so that I like very much, and goes really towards the future of healthcare, I believe. I also believe that, in fact, I was talking about the mRNA vaccines. We have a new weapon for any other pandemics, I believe, because we have the mRNA. It also mobilizes the authorities to accept this new technology. Also, it has demonstrated the benefit of this technology. And to some extent, I believe now we have the weapon. We just have to change the cartouche. How you say that? Cartridge. So if there is a new pathogen coming, so I guess we have the weapon, we have to change the cartridge, and we will be ready for the next wave of pandemics. And I guess this is we will be facing some other pandemics in the future. This is my guess. But so this is very encouraging, in fact. This. And so, yeah, this is a bit my observation.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I would say, if we look at how the response across the globe has been managed, and how also the population has accepted the response, it seems to, from my vantage point, it seems that societies and populations that trust in science and trust in institutions tend to deal better with this type of concerted response against this pandemic. So I guess the underlining point here for me is that we probably should get more to a situation again, politically, societally, where we appreciate the benefits that science can bring to our society. And I think that over the past years, there's been a bit of an erosion in the trust in science, an erosion in the trust in institutions, democracy maybe as well, which which probably isn't helpful now that we are in almost the third year of the pandemic, where people are getting tired and are opposing to some of the new rules that are being imposed. So as we are coming out of this pandemic, I think across the democratic political spectrum, we really need to revalue the importance of science and not try to undermine it for some political gains. The other big learning for me is that digitization has been all around us for the past 20 years, and we've all adopted it in our private lives, in many sectors of the economy. But I think we've seen in the pandemic that digitization in healthcare really was far behind and needed to leapfrog during this pandemic. And to some extent it has. I mean, none of us would be here if it wasn't for an app, right? So to some extent during this pandemic it has improved, but I think now that we are trying to create institutions for the future pandemic world, where we are trying to create finance mechanisms, where we're trying to recover from the pandemic, let's be very smart on how we, in my case, digitize healthcare so that we become more agile and more resilient coming out of this.
So if I may, yes, digitalization, and this is a learning, and I believe this is the beginning. We don't use it enough. So we start to digitalize. Application is one stuff, but we should also use digitalization for epidemiology, and so also learning. So we know that there is different variants. So through modelization, maybe we could also anticipate apparition, maybe emergence of those variants, and maybe also spreading of those variants. And that will also help us to anticipate and to prevent propagation of those variants as well.
All right, thank you for those takes on this very first question, important one. Second one, this pandemic revealed that our sanitary supply chains relied a lot on China, by example, with the example of masks, if you remember well, 2 years ago. How Canada and the European Union can work closer together in order to be more independent from countries like China?
I would be happy to make a start here. Supply chain, I said at the beginning, I feel like I've become a supply chain manager over the past 2 years because it's been such a priority concern for our company to be able to continue producing our medical equipment, and not only producing it at the scale that we did before that, but actually ramping up production amidst a pandemic where all air freight has been stopped. So there had been a trend, I think, in industrial production over the past 2-3 decades, especially with globalization and relatively frictionless trade, that you would have very, very efficient supply chains with one supplier of the screw and another supplier for the wheel and another supplier for the light bulb, possibly spread around the globe. And now, as we are trying to assess how we as a company can become more resilient against no air freight being available, or many suppliers across the world having to actually shut down for lockdown requirements. Now, how can we diversify our supply chains? And it is, from my perspective, it is less a question of being less dependent on China or less dependent on the EU, less dependent on the US. For me, it's more a question of how can we create production hubs, so to say, in parts of the world which, if another hub is down because of a COVID, because of a pandemic surge, the other production hub could still continue to function. So, so that is one part, and the other part is pretty simple. It's instead of single sourcing, can you go into dual sourcing? So if you have a supplier in China and they have to shut down, do you still have a supplier in Europe that can produce the wheels for the ventilator? Right, so these are some of the considerations that we made coming out of the pandemic, trying to diversify in a way that we are more resilient to these type of external shocks, but at the same time, of course, still being able to run a profitable business.
So I was thinking, so relying on one country is not clever. We have seen that. I was wondering whether having many small hubs of production, indeed, but modular hub. So I mean that we can switch very quickly from one asset to another one, and having them spread around the world would be much clever. And this is, by the way, a bit what we are trying to do also in vaccines. So making sure that we can produce the assets nearby where it is needed. And in that case, maybe we could identify what are the strategic assets that should be produced and where to produce and in a modular way.
If I can just add to this as well, I've often come across, obviously, the example of ventilators, ICU ventilators for helping us to breathe when we are down with COVID. That equipment currently is produced on 3 continents. We have north of 1,000 little parts that go into a ventilator, supplied by more than 100 suppliers. So what we, I think, now in this discussion need to resist is this tendency, okay, let's just, and this is a tendency, a very human tendency, let's kind of close our borders, let's bring everything towards us, let's create, maybe from a government perspective, let's create production capacity, a supply chain ecosystem around a critical production side. Let's resist this temptation, because we as a global company, we see how pretty much every larger government has approached us, can you produce ventilators in our country? And the realities are not that. It is not going specifically ramping this up during a pandemic. So I think you can probably create some sort of emergency production capacity locally for simpler products, maybe like a face mask. But when it comes to high-tech medical products that are regulated under the medical devices regulation and other very strict regulations, it is tough to ramp up new production capacity in a country. And so the answer for us had always been, let's make sure to have trade continue to be open and as frictionless as possible, so that we can benefit from the different competencies across the globe when it comes to the production of the different parts.
Very interesting, thank you. Number 3, which is we've talked about it. There was a kind of a revolution here. Vaccination with the new and very effective mRNA method has been a key factor in reducing the impact of COVID-19 to our populations. As the vaccination rate of both territories, talking about Canada and EU, are already very high in the health services are still in almost full capacity situation. What alternatives should we look at to tackle this pandemic on top of the vaccination, mRNA? Frederic, I think this one is for you.
So I was looking yesterday at, there is a publication from Europe showing that indeed vaccination with mRNA has impacted, was very efficient. So efficiency was more than 88% decrease in hospitalization and 93% decrease on ICU admission. So indeed, I believe vaccination was very effective. And so indeed, there is still incidence in COVID infection, and so this is due to persistence, so lack of persistence of the vaccines. But here again, we have 2-dose vaccines for now, and so most of the vaccines are more than 2 doses. So this is not rare to have 3, 4, even more doses of vaccines to get some persistence. So I believe today, I believe we definitely have, and this is, I believe, where we are going also to the 3rd dose of vaccines to make sure that we tackle all pandemics. I believe today there is also this bundle of hygiene measures that have been taken with the masks, with the alcoholic solution, etc. There is also more and more monoclonal antibodies, so treatment instead of prevention, but treatment for patients that unfortunately get so maybe, and we were talking about digitalization, I believe what we could do and what we should do is definitely improve our digitalization and modelization and anticipation, so surveillance of the virus themselves. And so I know I was talking with, it is in another context, but I was talking with Microsoft, and I know they have developed some virus trap that they put around the world in order to in fact, they capture mosquito, and then they do some PCR on the mosquito to detect what are the virus. So we know that the mosquito are carrier of some virus, some pathogens, and so they are doing this kind of stuff. So maybe we can be inspired by this approach. So trapping and seeing, and maybe here in this case to catch the host of the COVID-19 and see how it spread and how we can modelize and anticipate the next wave or the next variant.
I said before, kind of, let's follow the science. And when it comes to the question of what else aside from vaccination we can do, I tend to try to trust the institutions that are trying to manage population health or public health. So let's maintain that, maintain good discipline when it comes to the different measures that governments are putting into place in order to spread the virus. The second part, though, is more from a communication perspective, where I think lots still has to be done. In my circles, I find it very hard to find anybody who is vaccine skeptic, yet 30% or more of the population in some countries in Europe are still unvaccinated. So the question that governments and all of us and members of parliament, etc., need to ask themselves, how do you reach these populations? And my personal conviction is that, which is not based on science or any sondage, but my conviction would be that there is probably a very loud, very small minority that is fiercely against vaccination requirements, but that there is still a large chunk of those unvaccinated who are just not reached by the typical communication channels. Not everybody reads the newspaper or watches the news. So how do you reach these populations? And I think there is still a lot of work to do. And the digitization part, of course, but you evoked it already. I think an interesting aspect from our perspective is, aside from producing medical equipment, we are also producing software solutions. And one of the things that we do is create hospital IT management infrastructure. And when I see, or when we have all seen how our health systems have been struggling to respond to the COVID pandemic, to understand where is their bed capacity, where is the ICU full, where is the OR, the operating room maybe still, can still be turned into a COVID ward. There are technologies these days that help you manage this at an infrastructure level, at a region, at a country level. And that I don't really see implemented consistently anywhere in Europe. And there is huge potential to, aside from obviously vaccination and masking and all of that, to just also live with that pandemic threat, but having the healthcare systems and healthcare infrastructure so agile and so mobile that you could manage a respiratory disease like COVID, if vaccines exist and people don't die from it anymore, that you could manage it with just more effective health system management.
Very good, very good. I kind of agree with what you just said. Next question, how has medtech companies responded to the crisis, and what do you think of the EU response to the crisis so far? And the question on this particular question is, what should we do for better pandemic preparedness going forward?
Yeah, I said parts of it already, right? About the ramping up of the production that we've seen. So that was, I think, all medtech companies. Also, when we talked in our trade associations with our partners in the US, with our partners in Canada, it's been a race to respond to the surge in demand, and the big challenge that we had was to be able to source the materials in order to respond to the surge demand. And that I think has been the main struggle, and should also be the main learning coming out of the crisis. Have more from a business perspective, have more diversified supply chains, utilize global trade to your advantage, utilize bilateral trade agreements to your advantage, and then maybe on an institution or European Commission side, have structures in place that are very quickly able to be ramped up, and that are also accepted by the national governments in Europe, and that are accepted by the stakeholders who need to supply the health countermeasures.
So I guess medtech is also, biotech is a medtech, I guess. And so we have seen that they were really key in this, in the response to the pandemic, with the mRNA vaccines. And so without them, we will be not where we are today, in fact. I believe also it also put some pressure, but gave some opportunity to some medtech. So I'm thinking here particularly to a company that is nearby here, My Diagnostic, with a spin-off of IMEC based in Leuven. And so they saw here the opportunity to use their technology on PCR, nano PCR, to develop a device where you blow into it and it detects whether you are carrier of COVID or not. So this is also for those kind of company a big opportunity to demonstrate, and that was also for BioNTech, Moderna, and CureVac to show that what they have in mind, and the technology that they are developing that is at the edge of the technology can deliver value very quickly to our society.
All right. Thank you. Let's talk about Canada and the EU, if we can. What is the current partnership situation between pharmaceutical companies in the world, including Canada and the EU?
So I take this one again. So again, I believe we have seen that there is many interaction, and again, I was amazed, but I believe this is very efficient, where you have inventors of the technology, like BioNTech, again, Moderna, CureVac, partnering with big company like Pfizer, so the small one bringing the strength of the technology and the big one bringing the strength of market access. So the big one leveraging the strength of the small one, and both of them getting value out of that. We have also seen with AstraZeneca and Oxford University, I believe Oxford University has invented the vaccines that was commercialized by AstraZeneca. There is also, we learned yesterday some great news from a company from Canada, Medicago. So they are using plants to manufacture proteins vaccines, and they were using also the adjuvant of GSK, a vaccines company, and they have demonstrated that it was a very powerful 71% efficacy on a phase 3 trial. So this is another example of small company, big company from Europe and Canada delivering value to the world. And I believe even that it is effective against Omicron, but I'm not sure. But anyway, so this is the kind of example of interaction between continents, between companies, big and small companies, how they can deliver value to the society.
Just a precision on that, Medicago is a company out of Quebec City, small, medium size, and as you probably well aware of, GSK is based out of England, the headquarters, but a very big facilities here in Belgium. So that's a very good example indeed of a partnership between a small, medium-sized company, pharmaceutical company in Quebec, and a very large one here in Belgium.
Yeah, so GE Healthcare is an American company, all right, and global, of course, in nature, but headquartered in the United States, which in the north of the United States, and the Canadian border is extremely close. So we have quite a significant footprint in Canada, 3,000 people employed. And what I mentioned earlier, this hospital management infrastructure, the second one that we installed globally was in Toronto. So it's also in terms of Canada as a market, in terms of innovation implementation, is extremely important for us. The other aspect that, again, talking about digitization here, the other aspect that we should keep in mind, in order to, as an example, to develop new technologies in the digital space, in our case, for example, software that could detect lung nodules, cancers, tumors automatically. In order to develop such a software, you need to source data from all over the world so that you don't have, for example, a biased algorithm that you are creating that is maybe only developed on the basis of data from a certain population. So, as a matter of fact, there's a lot of research collaboration for us as well, currently going on with Canada, so that we develop our new technologies, our AI algorithms, in partnership with Canadian hospitals, with Canadian doctors, so that we create products that are usable across the world, and not just in the US or not just in Europe. And I think that's, we are all here in Brussels talking about digital health a lot these days. And Brussels, the European Commission, is working on a whole range of pieces of legislation that will impact how we are able to use our health data and control our health data, etc. The AI Act, the Data Governance Act, European Health Data Space, all this is coming. And as we are developing this, I think we need to have this global perspective in mind as an EU, but also if, as these pieces of legislations are then looked at by the Canadian government, and the Canadian government is developing their own pieces of legislation, let's keep this importance of we need to have broad data input available for our new technologies in order to develop something that is not biased and really brings a patient benefit.
Thank you. My 2 cents on that is another example. Moderna is looking to invest in Canada for a new facility. So that's an American-based company looking to invest in Canada, just to show you that Canada is a very good country to invest in, and it makes sense in order to grow and to do R&D, and in order to conquer the world, actually. So Moderna is a good example of that. Frederic.
And so, yeah, just let me think that one of the manufacturing facility of GSK vaccines is in Sainte-Foy, in Quebec, for the flu vaccines, I guess, for the North America. Yeah.
There you go. All right, next question. What is the role that medical technologies and digital solutions have played during this pandemic, and what should be done to create more resilient healthcare systems in the future? Felix.
Let me start with the second part of your question, so that I don't sound like a broken record about digitization. The aspect of how do we create more resilience, there's one main point that I maybe would like to add to this discussion here. The EU, but also national governments, have created unprecedented amounts of recovery plans, of investment plans that are put in place to avoid a future surprise that we are not surprised by a pandemic in the future. And as we are, so I'm talking about the Recovery and Resilience Facility, I'm talking about all the national plans, I'm talking about the EU structural and cohesion funds, which from a healthcare perspective are one of the main sources for investment in many of the countries of the European Union. So as we are having all these opportunities in terms of available finance, let's not try to put band-aids everywhere, but let's try to use this opportunity to rethink how we want to deliver healthcare, and do that on the basis of the learnings that we've had in the pandemic. And the part that I mentioned about hospitals knowing where there is still bed capacity, I mean, this to me is the simplest of starts. But then it goes very quickly into how do we create healthcare that is more patient-centric, that a patient has, it starts with an electronic medical record that is accessible not only by your GP, but also by all the specialist doctors that you have to see. Your images are made of all your medical data is made available there. That source of information is made available for research as well. So as we are making these investments as a society, as governments across Europe, let's fundamentally rethink how to create the structures that make our healthcare more resilient. And I'm saying, I guess, it's not about just creating new hospitals and not about just selling more equipment. We'd be happy to do it, but is it from a public health perspective the right thing? Parts of it, definitely, but it goes much further in becoming more integrated, more personalized, more adaptable to whatever comes next. We don't know if the next pandemic is a infectious respiratory disease. Maybe it's cybersecurity, maybe it's antimicrobial resistance, maybe it's a foodborne disease. We don't know. So I'll stop here. But I think the point is clear that I wanted to make.
All right, at the same time, just want to, for the audience, prepare your questions. If you have some questions at the end of the panel, maybe you can address 1, 2, or 3 questions at the end of the panel. So we'll give you the floor for that. Next question is, traditional R&D is becoming more and more challenging and a more effective and adaptive scientific approach model has yet to be defined. What could be a visionary model to follow in the years to come? And how Canada and the European Union could cooperate in that matter? Frederic, I think this question is for you.
Yeah. So I clearly agree that we are at the end of a paradigm in terms of R&D. So at least in healthcare, where big pharma used to work mainly alone, I believe we now have an opportunity we are at the convergence of digital technologies, deep technologies, and medtech technologies. And so I really believe here we have the opportunity to gather all those perspectives, to be much more creative, and to invent the healthcare of tomorrow. And so I will maybe give you some example. I believe the digitalization, and this is what we have done in my group, I believe the digitalization allow us to do what we could not do before. So we have digitalized patients, and so it makes me think of what you just said before with the data of the patient. But in Europe there is GDPR, and so this is not so easy. So one trick to overcome this GDPR challenge is to digitalize the human. In fact, we would like to digitalize human. And by the way, we are discussing with the European Space Agency in this field. Why to digitalize the human? Because then you will own your data, and we won't need to have your data. Just by asking you some question, we will then be able to modelize you, respecting your privacy, in fact. And so this is something that we have done. A pharma alone cannot do. Pharma has a lot of data from clinical trial, and they are anonymous data, so don't worry. But we don't have the power of digitalization, and this is where we have worked with Microsoft, for instance, and we have done that in 6 months. So this is pretty quick. We used 6 clinical trial and API trial coming from our company, but also from other companies that are data that are publicly available. And 6 months later, we were able to develop an application that is ready to be given to the physicians. And so the physicians just asking some question to the patients can predict with some probability what is the fate of the patients. So this is something that is very exciting, something that we can do. But by the way, this digitalization of the patient will allow also to do digital clinical trial. So instead of spending like 3 years of doing clinical trial, we can do that overnight. So which is that won't be the exact clinical trial outcome, but it will definitely guide us in the clinical trial design in order to be more effective and deliver value to the patients. There is many. So you know, when I discuss with my colleagues, I tell them we know what we know. We know what we don't know, but most of things we don't know that we don't know. We don't know that we don't know, if you follow me. And this is by putting people from Microsoft, from GE Healthcare, from Pfizer, a chemist with a biochemist, with nanotech, with this kind of diversity of competencies. When you put them together, then they suddenly discover what they don't know that they don't know. And this really triggers many creativity and many solutions. And this is what we are doing, in fact, in my group. So we have developed a big network, so internal network from our company, where there is key knowledge about regulatory, about pathology and stuff like that. But we have also developed a big network, and we tried also with GE Healthcare some time ago. We have developed a big network also external to our company that is very spread in terms of competency. So working with a space agency is not common for a pharma company, I guess. We have also developed a partnership with silicon expert in the world also. And so by doing so, we have also developed new ways of working. So we are big fan of hackathon, mechathon, datathon. So this is a neologism. So for those who do not know what is a hackathon, it is coming from hack to hack and marathon. So you invite some geek for 24 to 36 hours, and you ask them to develop an application or a solution, and in this time lapse, they will deliver that. Mechathon is the same. This is to make, and marathon. We have developed a process of 1 week that help to gather experts around the world and to develop a solution within 1 week, a prototype. And so virtually, in fact, we are working with anybody around the world, from Canada, from US, from Asia. And one example was very inspiring me. It was during our last hackathon. There was a company. In fact, I don't know where is the company. They were all around the world. In fact, this really was a liquid organization. And so we were sometimes talking to somebody in Asia, sometimes talking to somebody in Europe, sometimes in Canada, in fact, in the UK. And but this is a very exploded model, I believe, the future of R&D. So this is taking the best of everything around the world. We have now the way to reach out to each other. We are preparing now a hackathon with Israel, for instance, that will happen in Jan. So this is, for me, really the future. So we need a big one that has access to the market, that has the competencies to market access. And then we have to build the solution with all the competencies around the world.
On this hackathon point, everybody has probably already participated in a hackathon. I've participated in a couple of hackathons myself. What the power of these type of models, you know, is, I think, that it allows a lot of smart people out there, a lot of smart startups out there, to pitch and to learn from companies like GE that are bigger at scale, etc., and possibly to develop something that can then, with the help of a larger company, gain market access much quicker. So, for example, as GE, we have a bit like Microsoft Windows is for your personal computer. We have a platform from which is utilized to analyze medical images. And this platform, we opened it up to app developers outside of the company, so that they would get our training from us to develop apps that respond to a certain need, automatically detect a tumor, for example, in some part of your body, and then not only develop this app, but they have, in the process of this R&D work, they have the market introduction already as a North Star inside by launching it on our platform. So I think these type of collaborations, especially the big and heavy companies that are not always prone to these type of jump innovations, I think this is critical to give to create lifeblood for these for SMEs and for startups to bring their products to the market. So market introduction of some good products is really critical to get these innovation leaps going forward.
If I may, so, and this is true for startups to go through the markets, but what is also the value there is to have many startups coming from different horizons to think about one needs that has been detected by the market access specialist, and so they suddenly come with some very surprising solution they wouldn't think about if they were alone and so this is also what is the value of this kind of mechathon, because you really put the unknown together to create something that is very creative. And then it gives market access to many of them, or only one or maybe two, and it can also trigger to a collaboration between startups. We have seen that plenty of time.
Very interesting, thank you. Last question of the panel, then I'll jump into the audience questions if you have some. The life sciences business seems to be mostly a model for rich countries. Knowing that viruses ignore borders, even with lockdowns, flying restrictions, etc., what should be done so that life sciences can be economically viable and sanitary acceptable for every country in the world? So, as you guess, that's the last question. It's a broader question, more towards society and the world, as the pandemic is all over the world.
So I believe there is already a measure that are taken by some pharma. So I know for GSK they have the tier pricing approach that will that allow the developing countries to benefit out of the vaccines, especially. But we definitely to acknowledge that in the COVID-19 situation that was not perfect at all. I was thinking about it yesterday night. I believe, we know that Pfizer, for instance, their vaccines are not produced but are packaged here in Belgium. So it means that you will do all the work here, and then you will have to ship this without vaccinating guys around the country. This might be a bit shocking for the population, I guess. But there is solutions, and there is already companies here in Belgium, for instance, like Universals or Quantum, that are trying to develop some portable manufacturing units. And I believe, again, we are back in the discussion we had just before. This is by spreading the manufacturing center hub around the world that could be the solutions. And so, again, I believe there is a technological challenge. I know there is also Tesla that is working together with CureVac to develop a portable mRNA vaccines manufacturing unit, and maybe GE is working also on some solution. But I believe this is clearly the way forward is distributing the capacity of manufacturing around the world. And we have also to bear in mind, and I believe, I believe GSK experienced that with malaria vaccines, that the last miles to deliver the vaccines, for instance, is not an easy miles, in fact. And so here we take our car and we are at home, or we go wherever we want. This is not the case in most areas in Africa, for instance. So there is that also to take in consideration. I know there is solution with drones that are developed, but yeah.
It's you kind of saved the difficult question for our industry for the last, and it's the right question to ask. Why is it that medical technologies and pharmaceuticals are less available in many parts of the world? It's, we're not going to solve it here on this stage, but it's definitely something that we have acknowledged as an issue. And the two things that come to mind. First of all, to me, when I heard the question from you, the underlying question is about IP protection. And is it the right way forward that once you have discovered a breakthrough medication or medical device, is it right to keep your IP and not license it out or not give it out for free? We've had this discussion politically between Joe Biden when he started his tenure as president, and then I think the response from Europe came, no, we need to protect IPs. So it is a very difficult discussion, but bottom line, from a perspective of an innovative company, is you are investing a huge amount of your revenues into developing the next the next best thing in your product line, and you need to get a reward for that in order to be able to reinvest some of the money again to produce again the next launch of a product in 5-10 years time. What we have done as GE is, you don't have to have a Mercedes S-Class for everything. And it's also, for example, we created a portable ultrasound device because we understood, especially in many countries in Africa and Asia, you don't even have a hospital infrastructure that is sufficient, but you have maybe doctors, GPs that are mobile and available for patients in need, but they can't carry an ultrasound device with them. So we created one that is the size of your iPhone. And this is definitely not a solution that fits everywhere, but it is with that idea in mind, how can we create technologies that are not only good for the Delta Hospital in Brussels, but also for a smaller hospital in Nigeria. And we have in our product range, we have these type of products that are destined for these type of markets that are then more likely to be implemented there.
I think the underlying question was also by protecting third world countries is to protect ourselves as well in order to give them access to, by example, the vaccination, mRNA, new technology, very efficient, as we all know. And to give them access to that vaccination is to give us access to kind of a security, because as the question stated, it's just a global world pandemic and there's no borders to it. Even if there's travel restrictions or anything else, the virus find a way sooner or later, and then we get affected. So we have to address at some point, at some time, to that very question for our own safety. Have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, this is absolutely true, but I totally agree, and I don't think there is a willingness not to, but there is the difficulties of supply. And listening to Felix, I was also thinking, when you design a solution for a needs, you take into consideration also the environment of the needs, and so our ways of living, for instance, and our logistics. And so maybe we also have, and this is the demonstration of the ultrasound device, we have also to understand that maybe in remote countries from here, they don't have the same environment, they don't have the same culture, they don't have the same logistics, and we have also maybe to adapt the solution that we are delivering to the real needs there. In fact, even though if the primary needs remain the same, maybe the way to deliver it should not be the same, for instance.
And we don't have a government representative on our panel here, but from how I have followed the conversation with the European Commission, and when I see what the Chinese government is doing with vaccine diplomacy, when I see what the Biden government is doing with vaccine diplomacy, I think there are a huge amount of governmental efforts. Granted, until after a certain while, governments kept their borders closed and wanted to vaccinate their own population first, but then there has been this effort to make vaccines available at low costs globally. Is it enough? Probably not, but there's probably a large role to play for governments, international organizations, some of the philanthropic organizations as well, to make sure that we get vaccines all over the globe.
Thank you. Now it's time for a question from the audience, if there's any. Raise your hand maybe if you have a question. We have maybe time for one or two. And don't hesitate to, here's one.
Good, very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you a question about 3D manufacturing, which was supposed to help us to reduce supply chain problems. And in the case of urgent medical crises like this, it could have been particularly useful, but it doesn't seem to have been taken up as fast and as easily and as well as one would have expected. The medical device question, of course, is one, but for all sorts of other things, you would have thought that it would have been used more efficiently, more effectively, and more largely. Can you give us an idea of what you think the potential is for that in this sector?
So, true. And so I believe, and I was about to mention that just earlier, but 3D printing has been used. We have been reached out by the community. There is many Fab Lab that participated, but for the ventilators, and I don't know exactly which parts of the ventilators, but so there is many Fab Labs here in Brussels, in Louvain-la-Neuve, in Leuven. There is a UCB, GSK, that have contributed with their 3D printers to manufacture some pieces for the ventilator for the hospital. And so this is definitely a solution. And we are currently looking how we can better leverage and further leverage 3D printing to the healthcare solution as well. So this is part of our vision as well.
Very, very good question. And personally, I would have also thought that it would have been more available. And I asked myself the question to our production teams, why don't we just print all this stuff? Turns out it's not that simple to do it on an ad hoc short-term basis. Going forward, it's part of our how do we diversify our supply chains, how do we make our supply chains more resilient, what 3D printing capacity should we install close to where our products are assembled. And that is being done. But in the short term, if you include a product in your ventilator that has always been supplied by a supplier around the world and manufactured in a different way, on a short term you don't have the 3D printing plans, you don't have the CE certificate or the authorization to use this part then in a medical device, etc. So there were, during the pandemic, there were these type of hurdles that we were only I think indeed in 2-3 parts we were able to overcome these, but not more consistently. And also what I learned during this time, it is very often in these big medical technologies, it's not, say, 20-30 products or components that are missing, but it is a very specific component that lets the whole thing collapse, or that makes that you have 1,000 ventilators ready for shipment, but you still need that microchip that goes into the display to make the whole thing function. So, and then a microchip you can't 3D print, at least to my knowledge. So those were just some elements that I came across when we tried to explore that option as well.
So if I may, but again, I totally agree, and this is also to the next model of R&D. This is how to reach out to many small parts around the world in order to deliver global solutions. And again, I know that here in Belgium it was pousse-seringue, so syringe push. I don't know how you say that, but the part of the device that was 3D printed. So I don't think that you need any regulatory authorization or whatever. And so I know even I had a friend of mine, so I don't have a 3D printer at home, but I have a friend of mine that has a 3D printer, and he contributed, in fact, to deliver those stuff for the hospital here in Belgium.
Thank you. We have to stop here, but we can continue the debate or questioning ourselves after during lunchtime or somewhere else, sometime later in the year. Now we're going to jump into the second panel, SMEs and Global Growth, with Melina Howard as a moderator. So I invite all the conference speakers to take place on the stage. Thank you.